Have you been suggested this exercise for your hip or groin pain, but you feel like it's not helping you? This is actually a very common experience that people have when trying to overcome hip or groin pain. They might be located here, here, or here. If this is you, watch the entire video today. I'm going to show you a very simple solution that we give people at Performance Place Sports Care to resolve hip and groin pain. I'm Sebastian, part of the locally world-famous chiropractors in Costa Mesa, California. Stay tuned to the whole video to get all the gems throughout the whole thing. Now, at any point in time throughout this video, if you feel like we can help you or you want a little bit more information, there will be a free gift that pops in the screen. I think it's right around there or so. It's a webinar that we're actually going to cover a lot of great information about hip and groin pain and a lot of the questions that a lot of our clients do have when starting into the recovery process. I guarantee this will be the best information you've ever found on the internet on groin or hip pain. Now let's get into the exercises. So if you're having a problem with doing that specific exercise like this, the crazy reality of it is your hip might not tolerate hip flexion. This is what we call hip flexion, where you're flexing the hip. So a lot of times, and then we cover this partly in the webinar, is there's something called a flexion intolerant hip, which does have a lot of different diagnoses to go along with it, such as hip impingement and labral tears and so on. Even cam deformities and pincers don't really like hip flexion. Now, a lot of times doing this exercise can provoke people's problems, and actually what they end up having is more problems, more groin pain after doing them. So at Performance Place, we take a simple solution and we do the exact opposite. It's going to be called hip extension. And you guys have probably experienced it doing other exercises like hip flexor stretches or even bridges. But I'm going to show you a few variations that work well for people today. Now the first one is called alligator breathing. This is not a lot of hip extension per se, but sometimes building a nice baseline support in the spine is helpful to facilitate getting more hip motion in extension that will help resolve a flexion intolerant hip. The reason why this is because what we have in our body is what we call coupled movement. Coupled movement is when movements of different regions couple together. If you watch my hip and my low back when I do this exercise like a leg lift poorly, you'll see the lower back will arch sooner than the hip will extend. And so that's kind of an like an opposite coupled reaction. And so normally we want the hip to extend and the lower back and core to remain relatively stiff. So what we can do to facilitate this is create intra-abdominal pressure, which mainly is creating pressure through the guts or the breathing into the floor. And doing it just like this, called crocodile breathing, is one of the simplest ways to do it. So all I want you to do is be in this position here and take a deep breath into the belly, into the floor. And go again. Doing this about 10 times is enough to get the process going. Sometimes people feel like their back is stretching in a good way during this exercise. And a lot of times the hip flexor strain or the TFL strain that people experience actually diminishes quite quickly in this position too. Now, the way I like to couple this with hip extension is actually doing it in a half kneeling hip flexor stretch, such as this. So this is the starting point that I have. And actually, I'll flip sides just so you can see a little bit better. And so this one is going to be the hip that is flexion intolerant, so I'm going to expose it to hip extension. The way I can do this is to press my elbow onto the knee in front, which allows the low back to not extend so much. A common mistake that people make on this is they extend their back as they extend their hip too much. Not to say you can't do it, but it might just be too much right now. So one easy way is just to keep pressure here. And then you just lean the hip pocket towards the wall in front of you. Or another easy way is we're gonna take like a long they call those, it's a paintbrush, or like a long pointy one, and we're gonna turn the paintbrush tip towards the wall in front and try to put a dot directly on the wall in front of you. And I'm gonna do this about 20, 30 times. Now, a lot of people, they'll say, well, it feels stretchy right here. Yeah, it's gonna. And as long as it doesn't create any pain, that's a good thing. the hip likes movement. The hip likes extension, unless you have things like fractures or avascular necrosis or some other type of odd thing happening. But generally, if the movement is green and it feels good, it's okay to do for most people. Okay? About 20, 30 times is sufficient. And then surprisingly, what we tend to do as a measurement tool at Performance Place is actually we get people back into the position that they first feel like they had the problem. In this case, you guys didn't like this hip flexion exercise. And so a lot of people, it's crazy, they'll immediately have a 50% reduction of pain with the same activity. It just blows their mind. It's a really common thing we find here when we do the exact opposite that what bothers our hip or groin. So if bending your hip forward or bringing your knee to your chest bothers your hip, you might have something called a flexion intolerant hip. In that case, hip extension and progressions of exercises of hip extension might be really helpful to you, as well as avoiding some forms of triggering activities that require hip flexion for a period of time, like sitting deep into a chair or doing lunges or vice versa, or so on. So if this video is helpful to you, just know that this is step one of a multi-step recovery process. Pain is pain. Pain can be reduced very quickly, as you might have found in this video or in some of our other videos, but really pain is just step one. A lot of you want to return to things like golfing, swimming, running, baseball. There's a lot of things a lot of people still want to go back and do. Reducing pain is step one, so you can build a nice foundation of strength and resiliency about your hip. And that doesn't come over the course of just taking medication or resting until the pain goes away, or even stretching it away, as I might have today. But it sets a nice foundation so we can build strength and support around the area. If you guys are interested in more of that, reach out to us. We would love to work with you. We do have a lot of free YouTube videos as well, which covers some of the exercises we use. But to be clear, YouTube is a lot of random videos here and there. I'm sure that you probably came from maybe a snake video or a car repair video. It's a lot of random videos that you might find. There is no consistency and there's no progression. If you guys want a custom program and you want to work with someone who can coach movement well, we do a really good job. Reach out to us.